Hello friends and welcome. So today I want to talk about mono versus stereo, and what we've got here is a mono cartridge leading to a mono directly heated tube amp leading to some mono voice of Lancelot speaker combination. And this looks maybe like two stereo pairs, but it's actually at the moment a fully mono setup. And I've now been having this setup since about probably 7-8 months or so. And before that I always had stereo, so at least 30 years of 40 years of stereo sound. So what I want to do in this video is sort of contrast how that looks like, the differences between these type of setups, and some positives and negatives of each of these. So lots of you don't have experience with it, so I thought, you know what, I'm going to put it in stereo because I talked about it in my previous video. So I hope this this will give you some ideas and just put something that is quite unusual, but I think it has a real place in audio, and even for audio for music love, especially music lovers, and a little bit less for audiophiles, and I'll get into that a little bit as well. So just to be clear, when I talk about mono, I talk about a corner setup where the music propagates out, and this has some advantages, and then not a stereo setup playing mono signal where you get a phantom image sort of around here, and it might have depth as well. So I'm not talking about that mono, I'm talking about the single speaker setup. So a bit more like probably Saguma or so would have a mono setup. And so let's get into the differences. So the one way that you can see here is this propagation of sound. So here I've got a basically the speaker is designed to be in the corner, and all the sound waves travel outwards. And so the deflections here along the wall are minimal, and this also functions like a big horn. And what you'll see is with this type of setup is that the attenuation of the signal I feel is much less than with a stereo setup, and there's much less cancellations through reflections. So when you have the classical stereo setup, for contrast, you know that you get these patterns, and what you're really trying to do here is go equidistant from each speaker. And you might shift this a bit around to get the optimal frequency response in your room, and the minimal issues. You can also solve it with EQ for your listening position. But really you get all kinds of cancellation and interference issues. But here on your listening, on your ideal listening spot, especially around here, where you're equidistant to the speakers, you generally get a very good image and binaural effect, where the music envelops you and seems to engulf you from almost 180 degrees if the music is done cleverly and they've played with the phasing of the left and right channels. It can really envelop you. And however, that is very much dependent, because this propagation is much more critical and has deflections from the side walls, and the bass also travels backwards and then bounces back, and then goes interferes with the bass coming out of your woofer then at that time after the delay. So in a situation to get optimal effect, you'll need speakers that are designed for imaging, and then they can put you into a complete foreign space if your own room gets out of the way and doesn't have too bad of an influence. So then you have bass traps, and you need to manage the acoustics of your room to a minimum, so that you can hear the acoustics that are put into the original recording, or were actually in the original space where it was recorded, if you have a very nice recording. So those perks, if managed well, are definitely not present in a mono setup. So that is a huge difference. However, the propagation is much more problematic, and the sound quality varies a lot, and even the frequency response generally varies a lot, especially because well imaging speakers usually have far more directivity, often, as a rule, not as a rule really, but in general, will have much more higher frequencies when they're pointed towards you, and they run off, and that way there's some precision in the stereo image that benefits you. However, this is a much more cleaner propagation. The volume throughout the room is much better. And if you look at the social situation, this is one of the big positives of this listening, is that at every location here in my room, I've got a perfect sound balance. There is just nothing room. Even if I go out of the room and I'm in my study or something, or I'm in the hallway or I'm in the bathroom, this still sounds perfect. The bass rolls everywhere. I don't have huge cancellations, and especially once it's out of the room, it's unbelievably consistent how it sounds like. So, and that's a situation I've never really experienced with this. This has always issues, and it's optimized to a very small area to sound good. So that's one of the differences, the propagation. So the other thing I already mentioned is the immersion factor. So if you have really nice music with a spatial image, this can really sort of envelop you and engulf you. And when you go really sit in the place where you're meant to sit, it's a beautiful experience. And here you don't have that immersion in that way. So and that's probably your major thing that you'll struggle with if you try this out, or you're going to move to this, is you'll need some weeks to get used to it. And then you still don't have that immersive effect. Despite the fact that you can hear acoustics here, you can hear depth, all kinds of things. However, what you get in place of that is something else. And I just want to point out that this listening experience you will have nowhere else than at home at your audiophile setup. You will not get it at a live venue. You will not listen that way. It is completely limited to stereophonic listening, where in a stereophonic setup. In any live experience, yes, you hear all kinds of real things, but it is not as manufactured as this is. As nice and immersive and as nice the effects can be. What this does to me, my mind, is actually the same as in a live concert. You listen, the emphasis shifts from effects, from imaging, to the performance of the artist and the musicians playing. So if they were on a stage and you're listening in the crowd, yes, there's some difference how it sounds everywhere, but by and large you're listening to a mono experience. You're listening to the performance, what they're doing, how they're engaging, how they're playing together. And so I find that this mono setup has it shifts your emphasis of listening to the music itself. How was it performed? What are the musicians doing? What is their genius? How well does it all sit and timed, and how much does the band, an ensemble gel with each other? How experienced are they? Is there some magic happening? And if that's happening in the recording, this will put this is almost maybe like a black and white photo, but it's almost the composition comes out. That is I would say I've noticed that is the biggest plus, or that's one of the biggest pluses, that the emphasis goes to the music, not the paraphernalia around it. Now the other big benefit that I haven't talked about is actually cost, and getting it through your aesthetics commission. So a lot of people, this would actually much cheaper. You only need a single speaker, you only need a single wire to your stereo system, well, your mono system, and you only need a mono block for an amp. So you're saving everywhere. A mono cartridge to play records, vinyl records, usually performs much better at the same price level compared to a stereo cartridge. So there's all kinds of simplification and things that you can invest in quality when going for a mono system compared to an equally priced stereo system. So if you're prepared for the compromise in listening experience, or benefits and negative, your pluses and minuses, of course, that I already mentioned, you get to invest in a lot more quality. Also, I mentioned the aesthetic commission, but one speaker, I even noticed that in your average living room, if you want it in your living room, apart from the social aspect that sharing music is much easier, much more consistent than a stereo setup, this thing is much easier to get away with. You can just have a bit of dress it up as furniture, and even these big boxes, because they're only in one corner, I don't need to have them there, it wouldn't even fit. So my stereo setup was definitely far more ugly when it was stereo than it is now mono. So I think, and really just one last thing, and it's particular. So how suitable are stereo records to a mono setup? And I would say 98% of records or music tracks just sound fine. However, there are two exceptions where it doesn't sound fine. One, if there's some phase issues between left and right and somehow your blending interferes with it, then it can sound off. Where on a stereo system, that's of course it's designed for that. Now the other thing is a bit weird. If for example, I find it sometimes that some music have tacked on effects. So really it was never in the original performance, but the producer and whoever made the final mix, they thought, you know what, we know how to make this music interesting, we're gonna put some stereo effects in that, so that our friends that buy our music have a great experience. And so they do panning effects, they do Q sound, they toy around with phase shifts and so on to give you an unbelievably experience. Can be very well done. However, some of these effects, when they're tacked on, they can sound like infantile gimmickry when you have a mono setup. When it's done subtly, I would say Pink Floyd Time or something, that album, or you're talking The Wall, or you're talking Jean-Michel Jarre with such effects. It is very much integrated in the overall composition and it doesn't sound off. But if it was just idiot producers doing it, it can sound really off on this setup, where if you would stereo, you would go like, oh, that's a nice effect. Again, it depends a bit on your listening habits. So yeah. Now, if you have a stereo system and you want to check this out after watching this video, if you're a hardcore audiophile, I said don't even bother, because you'll be so set in your ways. You'll have your cables lifted from the ground, you'll have your stereo set up with spikes and everything else. You wouldn't even consider this probably. Now, if you would, and you're much more a music lover, you have a bit more chance that you will try this out. You could actually try to put your speaker towards one speaker towards the corner, maybe press them. Hopefully you have an old amplifier where you still have a mono button, and you could actually try this out and just disable one speaker and put the other in the corner, or you put them both in the corner. You could try that even, and try this out. You might have to move them out because not every speaker is designed to be in a corner, and you're using of course a speaker that is probably optimized for this use case. So, but you have to toy around with it where it will sound good. However, yeah, you could try it out and just see what it is. And I would say for a lot of people in a social environment, and while you're moving around, and if you're not in this position where you can actually sit down like that, I would say this is the much more preferred option than to having two silly boxes somewhat tucked away in your room. This will give you far superior results. So really what the learning is, it has positive and negatives. They're very distinct. Most people are not used to this sound anymore, and that's why I would say, you know, if you're at all interested, try it out, because in the 50s and 60s it was the normal. It has gone away since. However, a lot of people with these silly little stereos, they would actually, I think, much be better off with a mono system than a stereo system. Just because of the benefits of this this type of setup. So that's my video on mono and stereo. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I did a decent job in contrasting the two technologies. One is quite rare these days, so that's the reason why I did this video. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you got something out of it. Thank you for watching, and I'll hope to catch you in the next video. But until then, have a great week, have a great day, and take care. Bye bye.